If you've been playing Cardfight Vanguard for a very long time, you may have found yourself on occasion in a situation where you don't particularly enjoy the current meta, but you can't really do anything about it except wait for a ban list. In the case of Standard, for example, recently the Shiranui Luard meta may have been a little obnoxious, and maybe for you the Shoujo Doji meta is completely unbearable. In that case, there's not much you can really do. You can always attempt to play Premium, but sometimes Premium can be kind of daunting, especially if you've only ever played Standard, and sometimes Premium can also be obnoxious for you if there are certain decks you don't really like. You can always wait for Bushiroad to provide a new ban list or give enough support to the decks you actually enjoy playing, but you're probably going to be waiting for a really long time, and these kinds of solutions are unfortunately not very reliable to fix your enjoyment of the game. This is where I think community formats become a really great resource to have. G format is really fun. A lot of people enjoy going back to G. I am not one of these people, but I understand division and I respect the idea of going back to some of the most enjoyable forms the game has taken when you are not particularly vibing with what is going on right now. However, to me, G feels like a form of regression. You're basically going to a previous stage of the game that you've already explored. So what if instead we attempted to do something nice that can bridge the gap between Standard and Premium, keep all the good stuff that came with modern day Vanguard, but still add that small touch of nostalgia, maybe have an older card pool, to create an overall more unique experience that can be enjoyable at times where the official formats are not? Well, this is going to be the whole point of this entire video, which is going to be an introductory rant to the Godless format. Sorta. So you might be asking, what the fuck is a Godless format? Well, in the lore of Cardfight Vanguard, Godless is the name given to the era between the ends of G and the beginning of Overdress, and this is going to be really representative of what this format is. So we're going to keep all the improvements that have been made to the rules of Vanguard to create a standard format, and even some of the stuff that was added in V, but we're going to be using some mechanical restrictions on gameplay and a limited card pool to shine a spotlight on specific cards. What I'm going to be talking about today is going to be one suggestion of a Godless format, and if you want to adapt it to your locals to have fun with your friends, feel free to do it. This is the whole point. The point is to have a format we can play that people somewhat understand thanks to a common terminology, but something ultimately that you can personalize as a way to take back ownership over the game you enjoy playing, and maybe even attempt to relive some of the fond memories you've had if you've been playing Vanguard for a while. So why am I doing this? Well, personally, my nostalgia for Vanguard doesn't really come from G era, it comes more so from Limit Break and Break Ride. Some of my favorite fights like the Ren and Kote fight happened then, and I would honestly give anything to sort of attempt to relive these fond memories of playing Vanguard. The problem is, Limit Break is not a very interactive format. Because all decks start playing at 4 damage, usually, the way the format would work is that every player would attempt to damage the other at 3, so they can really play the game while farming up a huge hand, and eventually you would commit all your resources to make some big swings to push your opponent to 6 right away. Definitely not the most interactive gameplay loop. That is why we're going to be doing some tweaking to the card pool and to the deck building restrictions. Limit Break and Break Ride is however very interesting because that is when we started getting archetypes and subclans being sort of small factions within clans that would define their playstyle and refine it. And a lot of these came with very iconic units that a lot of people that played back then, or that played Zero actually, have a lot of fond memories of. And I think putting an emphasis on these subclans is also a really good call because a lot of these decks had legacy support in G era that ended up somewhat defining how the deck would play, but just wasn't good enough to be meta defining in the respective metas. So if the idea of a Break Ride Plus format with some standard rules appeals to you, well, how would you go about making a Godless deck? Because we're trying to incorporate all the quality of life improvements for Standard into Godless, when you're building a deck, you will have a right deck of 4 cards as well as a 50 card main deck. The player going second will also be getting a quick shield just to give a small advantage because going first is pretty good in a format where break rides exist. And when it comes to the deck building, as I mentioned previously, because we want to spotlight all the cards from break ride era and all the legacy support these decks got, you can play with all of the pre-V card pool. If you want to know what is included in the pre-V card pool, in a nutshell, we're basically going to be using all the cards that released before VBTO1, including certain specific promos. To keep some of the more degenerate interactions in this format in check, my suggestion is that you go with the modern day premium ban list. It is a little unfortunate if you're a Taro or a Tadba enjoyer, but if you really want to play full power Wiseman loop, you degenerate, I am sure that is a conversation you can have with the people at your locals during your roll 0 and establish that in your version of Godless, Taro is not banned. These are not meant to be hard guidelines. I'm just trying to throw out suggestions so we can have a basic understanding of a format. And just so you have a better understanding of what a Godless deck would look like, how about I show you one of mine? Just to recap, we're playing with clan fight rules, with the pre-V card pool, using a premium ban list with a 50 card main deck and a 4 card right deck, and the player going second gets a quick shield. After seeing the list, you may have had some questions as to why I do not run any G units or any other cards that were characteristic of the pre-V card pool. Well, as I explained previously, the goal of the format is to showcase the Break Ride and Limit Break era cards. That is why Strides, G-Guards, and Legion cannot be performed in this format. This might be a little controversial if you are fond of these mechanics, and again, if you want to try a Godless format with G-Guards, Legion, and Strides, you're basically going to be playing G-Era with a right deck, which can be fun on its own. You can also try making a Godless format where Legion is available, but there are reasons why I decided to exclude these mechanics from this specific format. When it comes to Strides, Strides allow for a lot of flexibility for decks that are made to be played around them, and it's something that Limit Break and Break Ride era decks can't really keep up with, especially if they don't have a strong archetypal Stride. Stride also provide a lot of and consistent power to decks, making it so that it's really hard to keep up defensively with these numbers, especially if you don't run G-Cards in the format. Legion faces some very similar problems, but on top of that, the power from a Legion stays, so it's going to be a consistent 20,000 power, and the cost for Legion is not really a cost. You basically just return triggers to your deck, 1, prolonging the game, and 2, increasing your odds of checking a trigger, making it so any Legion deck is basically just going to be superior to a Limit Break / Break Ride deck, even with legacy support. I think an argument could definitely be made for trying a Legion Godless format, and I would really enjoy maybe a Legion Godless with G-Guards enabled, but I feel like Legion as a mechanic warps the format around it a little bit and makes games a little longer than necessary. When it comes to G-Guards, the biggest problem I have with G-Guards is the fact that they're not necessarily all equal, especially if we're looking at the pre-V card pool. Some clans have some abysmal G-Guards, and they don't have the Strides to balance that out. And also, I believe that because of the low power in this format, G-Guards are a little too strong when it comes to stopping turns, and it will also lead to needlessly long games. If you want to try a Godless format with G-Guards, you can certainly give it a try, and if you enjoy it, you can definitely leave some feedback in the comment section down below, and who knows, maybe your arguments will be so convincing it will actually win me over. So despite the fact that these key mechanics are not present in the Godless format, there is still a lot of variety when it comes to deck building, and there's a lot of cards you may want to consider when you are looking at your favorite clan's card pool. Before we get to all the important cards, I would like to ask you to please allow proxies at your Godless tables. Some of these cards are really hard to find, and it would suck if the format were to be gatekept behind buyouts or really old cards that a store that maybe started carrying Vanguard with Standard doesn't necessarily have. One strategy I suggest for proxies that works for a lot of clans is using V cards instead of the G version, because the V card is not legal in the format. Obviously, it's going to be a proxy for the G version of the card, and please have the text of the original card as a reference to make it a little easier on your playgroup. But now that the small disclaimer is out of the way, what cards should you put in your deck? So the first thing to look at is going to be your perfect cards. A lot of decks have access to really unique perfect cards that either further your game plan or provide really good value. The countercharge PGs are generic, they were reprinted in premium collection, and if your clan doesn't use them in premium, you can definitely just slot them into your deck and have a great time, having much better access to counterblast than some of the other decks in the format. There's also some keyword perfect cards and archetypal perfect cards that are either not locked behind GB or locked behind GB1, which is pretty important because of a card we're going to be talking about later. Since we're playing mostly a format with limit break cards, limit break enablers and self-damagers are also really good. A lot of limit breaks are very low cost, costing for example 1 CB or having a skill that doesn't even involve counterblast. So being able to activate them right away, especially going first, can be the difference maker when it comes to the viability of your deck. Self-damagers are also pretty nice because they enable heal triggers. In this format, it's a little less impactful because you are less likely to randomly check a trigger, and triggers are a little less impactful because they're lower power, but it's still a nice option to keep, especially in certain decks that do require more counterblast, because we have really good countercharge options available to us. If you are more of a cheap person, I feel like you can also still enjoy Godless, and you should definitely take a look at the keyword pool and at the later grade 3s your deck has got. For example, Darkness is an entirely playable deck in Godless. A lot of the support is not locked behind Generation Break, and it allows you to deck thin very efficiently to control the board a little bit. You can still resolve Word Tiger Jaeger. You have Serpent Charmer to bounce back cards. You're basically playing this really grindy control deck that is doing the same things Darkness used to do, but a little slower. A lot of other keyword cards can be implemented as engines in other decks, and there's definitely a lot of cards that can be used as an entire keyword deck. So if you're a G fan, I implore you to take a look at your entire card pool and maybe come up with something with your favorite boss unit. Another set of overlooked cards back in the Breakout era was the Fighters Collection cards. They came out a little late, mostly close to the transition towards Legion, but a lot of them are really viable. Minette is one of my favorite examples. She says that when your unit is retired at the end of turn, you counter charge 1, providing you basically infinite counterblast in Great Nature. That skill is not even her limit break. There's a lot of other Fighters Collection cards that were kind of slept on that you could definitely build a deck around, especially if you're a bit tired of the existing limit break card pool. After that, I think you should also look at the grade zeros with effects your deck has access to. Because we are running a right deck, we are not locked behind specific ratios of grade 1s, 2s, and 3s. A lot of these grade zeros were ran at 1 as a starter and were a crucial part of the game plan of a deck, so being able to run 4 of them and resolve that skill more than once can make your deck a lot more viable, in a way that you just couldn't back in G or in Break Right. Last but not least, another important category of cards to look at is going to be Cray Elementals. A lot of Cray Elementals have very specific answers to certain situations that can come up in this format. For example, one of them makes your ultimate breaks limit breaks. There's another one that can be an early perfect guard, and there's a lot of really neat interactions like that you can use to flesh out your deck. But the most important one you may want to look at is Twitter Run. Twitter Run says that if you have a grade 3 Vanguard and there are no face-up cards in your G-Zone, if no unit was placed on your opponent's Vanguard last turn, you get to put this card face-up in your G-Zone and draw a card, and he counts as Generation Break 1. So all the cards that are GB1 are technically playable in this format, but they are going to be a little slower because it's locked behind this specific card that forces your opponent to not have ridden last turn. Nonetheless, a lot of really fun decks become playable with this. For example, Time Leap. You can definitely try to make a Time Leap deck functional in Godless, even though your opponent will have ways to playing around it by not staying on the same grade 3. And this is just a small example of the considerations you can make when building a deck in this format. So if you found this pitch for a new format interesting, feel free to try it out with the people at your locals. Tell me how it goes in the comment section down below. Also, if you wanted something to get your creative juices flowing, you can check me out on Twitter and especially on Bluesky. I'm going to be posting deck suggestions for Godless on Bluesky, so I'll do 3 decks for every clan and I'll attempt to explain in detail my thought process behind it. I'm not necessarily a master of the card pool, so if you have any insight, please put it in the comment section down below and tell me what you're thinking. Are there any interactions that look absolutely busted and that should not exist? There's a couple decks I have my eye on. Duos might need a serious hit because the amount of cards that deck draws is just absurd. But so far it's looking very fun and healthy, and there's always stuff we can do with a custom ban list to attempt to address the biggest problem in the format. In any case, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.